What do I tell our young kids about why we got divorced?
Yes, this is a good one. When I was going through my separation, my kids were, oh gosh, let me do the math really quick. I think my youngest was one, almost two. So when I realized my marriage was heading towards falling apart, heading towards counseling, separation, I mean, my baby was 3 months old. So we had gone through a lot of counseling. Obviously, it didn't end up working out. So by the time everything was finalized, I think she was like one or two. And I have three children. So I think it was about 1, 3, and 5 at the time when I got divorced. So I can speak to this question very well. And I will say, yes, age plays a factor into what you relate to your children, especially when they're younger. Just keep it high level. Just what I said, if anyone's take my advice, I just said, your daddy and I just realized we were just better friends than married. We still love you. We are still your parents, but we're just better friends and we get along better when we live separately. And I will also say if you and your ex can be on the same page, that helps if your messaging is aligned. So then there's no questions. The kids aren't trying to like fill in the gaps on their own. But we just always kept it very positive, even though we had issues towards one another. We didn't let the children see that. And yeah, I kind of just left it as that. Like we were better as friends, and they saw us fight a little bit. And so I would just say, we're happier when we're living apart. We don't, you won't see any fighting or anything like that. And, watch your tone and your inflection in your voice, all of that comes into factor when you're talking to the kids. Regardless of you're separated, you're divorced for a reason. Obviously, there's going to be hostile emotions towards one another, but the children most likely aren't seeing that. Like they see you as their mother, as their father, however the situation is. So I just wanted to keep that. I was cognizant of keeping that just as pure as possible for the children. So they're especially at a younger age. So they're not left to, oh, mommy's the bad person, daddy's the bad person. Should I not love this person? Like they don't need that. They just let them love one another, individually as their parents, and then just keep your issues between you and your ex or a counselor.
Yeah, that is, and let me say, that's a tough conversation. A lot of times it's it's the parents crying, not even the kids, because they
Yeah.
don't fully process it. It sounds like you were able to get on the same page with your spouse at the time about this conversation. A
Yeah.
lot of times we have one person that has done a little more research. Maybe it's the person that planned the divorce or initiated it. How do you present that conversation to your partner about
Yeah.
having this
Yeah,
talk?
absolutely. And I will say, without getting into any details, I will just say that the divorce came as a shock to me. So I was that person who was like, "Wait, what's happening?" But again, we went into it with, let's just keep this as positive as possible for the children. Again, because especially they were so young that they wouldn't understand things anyway if we sat them down, and talked to them. I mean, they were so young. So before any conversation that he and I had with the children, we would get together, whether it was in person or a phone conversation, and just say I was almost like a business meeting. Like, okay, these are the notes. Are we aligned? Let's go into that. And if there's not something that we agree on, you and I can talk about that. But let's just at least keep this messaging clear for the kids. These are the points we're going to talk about. We're going to keep it positive. If you are still emotional, if the feelings are still so raw, like get those tears out, not in front of the kids would be my advice at first. I mean, it's okay for them to see some emotion, but for me, it was just like, let me stay strong for my kids because I didn't want to scare them. I didn't want them to worry. I was working through it on my own or with, my ex at the time, spouse at the time. So I say, if you can, I know there's definitely difficult situations where you just can't stand one another. You don't want to even be in the same room as each other. How can I absolutely have a conversation with this person? I hate what they did to me. But if you can just, for lack of better terms, suck it up and say, let's just put our kids first. And say those words to your soon to be ex. Like, I know we have issues. Clearly we're getting a divorce, but let's just suck it up and put our best foot forward for our kids. So they're not, consumed by what we're going through. Let's just keep their lives as hopefully as normal and positive as possible. And then we can work out our stuff on the back end. So try to get aligned before those conversations happen. So you are on the same page and, one person is saying something that the other person's shocked by.
Right. And so we're talking about with young kids. I'm sure you've had clients with teenagers, kids that are a little older, maybe more emotional, maybe they know a little more. Any tips for talking to your teenager or older kids about why you're getting a divorce?
Yeah, you can give a little bit more information as well to them. They understand a little bit more. It's one of those things too, though. It's the way I view it again still is, how do you want your children to look at your ex, at the other parent? And it might be so easy for you to have that slip of tongue and be like, oh, well, your father did that. So I always just say, just always keep your kids first and is your first focus, regardless of the age. Because even if they're 16 or 18, that's still their parent. And so if they love their children, again, your issues were between each other. If they're a phenomenal father or mother, just still keep that relationship as pure as possible. You can say things like, maybe like, yes, we did some things that hurt each other in the marriage. But this is how I learned from it, and this is how I grew, and this is how I'm now setting new boundaries. Because especially if you have older children and maybe they're starting to date, you can have those conversations like, I had witnessed this, or, your dad and I had, gone through this situation and I didn't like how it made me feel. And I want you to be cognizant of how it makes you feel. And this is what I did to these are the words I use, or these are the boundaries I use to kind of protect me from, holding certain standards. So maybe language like that.
Yeah. And the one thing I've taken from coaches like you is you're probably not going to have all the answers. So maybe have one or two that you can fall
Yeah,
back on. But the key is listening. Just let them talk. Really just throw it back to them, because deep down, that's really, they'd want to be seen and heard. So if you can just sit there, listen, nod, that's always a good way to fall back on.
absolutely. And ask questions. If they come to you and ask something, it's like, why do you ask that? Or what makes you think that? And then again, just keep them
Hmm.
talking.